most businesses only focus on the leaves, even though the problems really are in the roots and the trunk, but the time and energy they spend is just on the leaves.
Every single company, every client we're working with, all the partners we speak to are all figuring out projects that involve navigating crazy amounts of change and supporting leadership to get through that. Is that what you're seeing as well?
For sure. I think there's been a huge change in how change is dealt with. I can really remember like 5 or 6 years ago getting a change project and that being a very specific thing with specific needs and specific communication requirements. And obviously, of course, you get transformation gigs still, that still happens. But the idea of change being a finite thing that happens in a certain time frame and is quite binary and is a process we have to take people through once, that's just completely changed now. I think the expectation instead that people need to be change ready all the time and people need to not just be able to tolerate change, but actually thrive in it. That's a massive shift over the last sort of 5-6 years.
Absolutely. And do you find yourself writing EVPs or values where basically one of them is sort of involving being adaptable or resilient,
agility,
or ready for anything?
Resilience, 100%. And I think also actually so much has changed in the world in that time as well that we, often there's a temptation just to look at the workplace, but if you look at how much has changed in the last 5 or 6 years, from the pandemic to remote working to how social media has changed to now the rise of Gen AI, that change has never been as fast as it is right now. And it will also never be as slow as it is right now. So we're in this really interesting precipice, I think, of change and what that means to be truly ready for it.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. This is not going to get easier anytime soon. I kind of feel like some of the leaders we speak to are not fully accepting of that, or they're kind of waiting for someone to give them the perfect change map or to run a project or have a toolkit.
Or they expect other people to be as okay with change as they are. But the difference is they have control and oversight. And so it is easier to handle change when you know it's coming or when you have some role in diagnosing or solutionizing for it. And you're right, a lot of our conversations with clients start with, can you help me with a toolkit to manage our people through change?
Or a one-off training.
Yeah. And you know what? Like 3 or 4 years ago, that felt actually quite proactive and we would have applauded that. Frankly, we would still applaud anyone that can sense that colleague need and anticipate it. But I think what's changed for us is that need to really consider whether it's just a colleague training or a one-off piece of work that's required, or if it is something more systemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that plays in really nicely to the work you've been doing as well. So Rhi, for our listeners that don't know, has been beavering away, speaking to experts, working on this amazing white paper, which is going to be out in just about a week or so for those of you listening. So get excited, sign up, which is really focused on resilience as something that you can build into systems and organizational design rather than being something that you demand of colleagues.
Correct. And you've summed it up. I mean, if I was to say it in a nutshell, it would be resilience by design, not on demand. And it's been basically a strategist's dream for the last few months, going heavy into research mode. I had a sort of hypothesis from just all of the clients that we've worked with anyway, and seeing where change has really stuck and where colleagues have really thrived and then where they haven't. And then went away and did a load of research to challenge or validate that hypothesis, but also to widen the perspectives. So spoke to, I think about 7 or 8, maybe more leaders in our space, but also out of our space. So made that effort to speak to AI specialists, to burnout experts, to neuroscientists, of course, to CEOs and CPOs, but also employee benefit consultants. How can we think about this topic of resilience through many different lenses? And then does this hypothesis, if it actually needs to be something that's by design rather than demanded, does that carry out when you look at it through those different lenses? And it did, is the good news. So
that's always great when a research project turns out how you think it might.
It did get validated, but importantly, it got extended, and it we looked at it through many different lenses. Especially with AI coming in, that was a really interesting, and the EU mandates on helping your colleagues be AI ready that was an interesting added extra that we got from the very sage Fiona Passantino. But where we really netted out is resilience isn't something you can just demand of colleagues, and it's not something that you can expect unless you are designing your system for it. So we sent it in on this model, which is a tree. And sometimes I feel a bit hippie coming. And I said when I was on stage the other day, I sort of had to say to the audience, just come with me for this analogy. But truly, and I looked at lots of different models, but the tree got it the most simply. And that's because you know that unless the roots and the trunk of a tree are stable, healthy, and well, you know that the leaves won't thrive. And in the model that we put out in the white paper, the roots is the organisational level of resilience. So this is systems, policies, leadership. The trunk is the team level. You know, resilient teams are ones that can absorb rather than just withstand, pressure. They need to be able to actually absorb it and bounce back, not just sort of endure it. And then we get to the leaves, which is the visible outcomes. And that's where we actually get to the colleague outcomes, colleague engagement, colleague responsibilities for resilience as well. And when we were speaking with the experts, we actually looked at each of those layers, roots, trunk, and leaves, and thought, what if I was in an organization now, what would I need to be asking myself to ensure that resilience was actually integrated from a systems and design perspective into each of those layers? What we find, and I'm sure you'll agree, is that most businesses only focus on the leaves, even though the problems really are in the roots and the trunk, but the time and energy they spend is just on the leaves.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I loved about when you've talked through it before is also that it allows for a fairer system as well. Because realistically, if you're only focusing on colleagues being more resilient, every single colleague is going to have a different reaction to that, right?
Correct.
And some colleagues for whom they have had to be resilient their whole lives because they're working in environments that don't suit them, or they're experiencing microaggressions, or they're dealing with racism. For them, resilience is something they've had to be in the workplace.
And actually, it's sometimes a loaded word as well. Yeah. Some of the interesting evidence we got in the research is sometimes that's not even the right word for certain colleagues. When we were speaking with Oana, the founder of Fair Cultures and the host of the brilliant Fair conference in Barcelona, that was really the focus. It was the intersection of resilience and inclusion.
Yeah.
And it's fundamental, I think, to both that they're symbiotic, I think. And when we really look at it, resilience to me as a white woman in a position of leadership will look completely different to a Black queer man navigating microaggressions whilst trying to hit sales targets. That even the concept and the definition is different for us. And that's why by looking at it through the systems process, you are no longer putting, as you say, the effort and responsibility onto the colleague, i.e. the leaves. You're actually asking what the system has done to put them in the right position to begin with.
So give me an example, and for our listeners, give me an example of what a system lever you could pull would be.
So if we're looking at the organizational layer, I would be looking at things like leaderships and policies. So policies aren't keeping track with the level of change that we're going through. And honestly, they are viewed as sort of the tick box, paper pushing exercise, whereas actually quality policies, and you tend to see these in the bigger organizations. We had a brilliant example from Google around miscarriage and stillbirth policies, where the person didn't even know it existed until it affected him. And that's resilience in action, or resilient organization in action. It's often not a conversation because you don't know that you need a policy until you're protected by it.
Yeah.
And
you may not even become aware of it at that point. So you
Correct.
may just be reacting and being resilient and saying, okay, from what I know, my organization expects me to just show up, tough it out, because they've continually told me that resilience is key.
And high performance is key.
What I don't know is that there are systems and policies in place when I cannot be that.
Correct. So that, that's one policy. Of course, you could look at the well-being policies. You could look at the employee benefit policies. There's lots there at a grassroots level that would need to be right. But then you've got leadership, which is some of the most important parts of resilience in the sense of how leaders are celebrated, how they even get to positions of leadership. Do they get there through proving that they can handle mindless endurance? Because endurance is not the same as resilience. resilient leadership is excellent and it's what we want. Leaders that have got to their positions by burning out, or perhaps because they're just superhuman and they don't burn out, that's not the role modeling that we want to see. Of course, we want to see high agency, high performing leaders that achieve and sort of go beyond their dreams. Of course, we also want to see those people, but it needs to be done in a way where they aren't glorified for overwork or for unsustainable work.
Yeah.
So
that we're not creating example of what good endurance, resilient leadership looks like that actually won't work for everyone else.
Correct. And making sure that we then have got an inclusive, diverse leadership portfolio, so that what we're actually seeing is it's not just one type of person that does it here, that makes it here. And then also how leaders manage their teams as well. How workflow, and this is as we come up into the trunk, but how is work actually managed in teams? When the proverbial shit hits the fan, I'm not sure if we're allowed to swear on this.
We're allowed to swear, it's our podcast.
When the shit hits the fan, do we just rely on the same people or the same teams to fix the problem? Because that is not a resilient organisation. What that is knowing that you have holes and gaps, but knowing that someone is just scooping the water away. So
we see that all the time with our clients,
always.
Right? You see the heroic teams being rewarded and that almost badge of honor of, well, we're the ones that always have to firefight and put it out and it always works. But actually what they're doing is plugging a hole that means you don't see the systemic issue because it's always fixed.
And often the issue might not be the people. I had a really refreshing conversation with the CEO last week, and we were talking about what's needed for their business strategy to really take hold. And what they actually admitted to and quite open with was that the problem's not the people, the problem is the tech and tools, but they can't move quick enough. And so the conversation I was having was, how do we rally and manage our people? And really, we do still need them to step up. We do need them to keep focusing, whilst also accepting and admitting to them that they are not the problem.
Yeah. And that's important, because otherwise what you're effectively doing is gaslighting your employees.
Correct.
You're
Corporate
saying,
gaslighting.
if you just worked harder and if you just tried more, if you were more resilient and agile, you would be able to solve this problem. But actually they're working with one hand tied behind their back.
Correct. And it's that collective we just need to do this, we just need to do that. And in this particularly refreshing, candid conversation, it was actually, no, that they're doing pretty good. Of course, there's attitudes and capabilities we need to dial up. But if we were to look at where the holes aren't in the people and culture space here.
And also, if you think about not doing that diagnosis and you just keep asking your people to be more resilient or work faster or work harder, actually you're going to get to diminishing returns.
You do.
Anyway, you're not fixing the challenge and you're investing your time and energy in the wrong place.
That has been proven recently by Carrion and Box, where they look at cycles of change, and you can literally see the cycles continuing and continuing. But when you look at the engagement, you see engagement is going down each time. So we're in ever transforming change now. It's continual, but the engagement rates are going down. And that's because the system is not resilient enough to withstand the pressure of constant change.
Knowing that change is, as you say, never been as fast, but also is never going to be this slow again. How important is this work, and how do teams prioritize it, right? So how do you prioritize looking at your systems instead of saying, okay, well, I don't have time because I'm still trying to do BAU and figure out how to use AI and all of these things. How do I actually step back and do that work?
I think it's hard, I do. And when I've been talking about this with clients, I have been really intentional in the conversation that we've had, because the theory is the theory. How it actually comes to life for your organization differs. And the fact is that we need to use it to solve the problems that you have. Of course, I would love just to say, right, we're gonna stop, we're gonna pause everything, we're gonna redesign from the ground up, we're gonna make you a resilient organization. But if the first problem we ask any client is, what's the problem that we're solving? And the problem we ask each other all the time when we're working on briefs is, but does this solve the problem? Does this make the boat go faster? And, we are here in service of business and business outcomes, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't, you shouldn't have to be a superhuman to survive your job. You should just be able to be human. But I think more often, especially for people who would consider themselves in needing more inclusive spaces, those people have to be super resilient just to survive. So Where would I start? By actually auditing the culture and doing so with intentionality to, we need to solve this problem and we're going to look at it from a culture perspective. We're going to assess the whole layer from leaves to trunk to root and see where we think the issues are. Lots of organizations know it already, like the conversation I had around tech and tooling. But starting to actually use the data you have, if you know that middle managers are an issue, or if you know that there are certain parts of the way your workflow works that are cumbersome and tricky, those will be the things that, of course, will be slowly degrading the optimum resilience that you could have in the organization.
Yeah. Well, then at least you can decide what to prioritize. Then at least you can build a roadmap and say, okay, we are going to need to invest in this system, or we are going to need to invest in upskilling our middle managers. I do think it's important to say it doesn't take away the intention that people will also be accountable for managing their own resilience, upskilling themselves.
I'm glad you said that, because I think, and it is actually a critique of the white paper that we have now, it would be a fair critique to say you're taking away the accountability of the individuals. And I would say no, that there is a whole layer called individual resilience in that model. And I think people are fundamental in the process to being able to self-diagnose, put their hand up, request recovery time, be aware of how they're feeling and actually being honest about it, and not entering into a marathon of endurance, rather knowing how they can be most productive, which will be with recovery. There are so many analogies with resilience and high-performing sports teams that you could marry across here. And of course, when that individual is a manager or a leader, they have more responsibility to actually create environments that can be resilient, because ultimately people won't fail in a vacuum. They'll fail when they were put in a situation that was never actually designed to succeed.
Yeah.
So I think they have a huge responsibility. It's something I actually personally believe as well in the teams that we run, that I'm not responsible for your happiness. I'm not responsible for your anxiety. I am responsible for the design of the environment around you, but you have a role to play in putting your hand up and diagnosing and requesting what you need in that.
And that works if you have open communication,
correct,
open feedback, and you've, again, created the right environment for people to know what resources are available for them, know that they can put their hand up. And it's even
an option to put your hand up.
Exactly.
And that's when also there's the sort of final part of that model, which is called the resilience multipliers. And these are the parts that can sort of amplify and like really help resilience take root, or can actually degrade and sort of undermine your efforts at a resilient organization. And we put these in there because from all of our work in culture scans and culture audits, we can recognize there are some forces at play that make some organizations more resilient than others. Typically, those are cultural consistency. So knowing exactly what you get out of the culture and it not being a surprise. That's hard to do in a changing environment, but there are parts of your culture that should be fixed and there are parts that can flex.
And we explore that with the truth triangle, which is another one of our models, which basically says,
time.
Are those core elements defined?
Yeah.
Do you know where you're going? Do you know how your culture
Are they in
supports
service
that?
of each other, or
Exactly.
are they conflicting each other? So culture consistency is one of them. Communications is the other. It's an organization that's good at communication and is able to do quality two-way communication, two being the important factor there, is a more resilient organization. And the other one is purpose, which is that you can withstand pressure if you know why. Pressure with meaning is easier to withstand for certain periods of time.
And I think that's a really interesting word, purpose, because I think a lot of companies are turning away from purpose with a big P.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that purpose doesn't always have to mean you can see how your efforts are saving the world.
Yeah.
It just has to mean I know that I'm making a meaningful contribution to something I believe in at whatever level. And also that I understand my own purpose in being here, whether that's because this is somewhere I'm going to learn and grow, or whether that's because it pays really well or it has really great benefits.
It's
like
intentionality
purpose,
really for
me.
Similar conversation I had with a client. I was like, we don't need to rewrite your purpose. We're not talking about big Ps. We're talking about here and now for this business strategy. What why are people here? What do we need to do?
And is that the same for everyone? Is it clear? Do you understand why people are here?
And are you communicating on it? Back to one of the other multipliers, is it being talked about a lot? So those are just 3 multipliers. What we say in the white paper is actually these do differ per organisation, and these are 3 of the most popular. But I would say, like for a lot of organisations, for example, ED&I would be one of them as well. Those are just the 3 that we find come up the most. And these are the forces at play that you could be doing your very best work. And that if I was to go back to a nature analogy, it's one of a pot plant. You know that meme where it says like when your house plant just can't survive in the high performing environment of your home.
Exactly. You just need to be more resilient, house plant. I know I don't water you or look after you or put you in optimal sunlight.
Exactly.
Survive.
And that's what it is. It's not, we're not here talking about the room or the trunk or the leaves. We're talking about the soil, the nutrients, the pH, the air quality, stuff that is not as clear.
So what would an example be of a multiplier?
Those are the 3 that we've just been through. So
ED&I.
So ED&I is often one, but the 3 that we find the most is comms, culture consistency, and purpose.
Got it.
And these change per organisation ultimately, and the best way to find them out really is through the culture scans. But it's those extra bits that you can do your very best work with your pot plant. You can have done everything that the book told you to do and it's still not thriving. And that will be because you'll be lacking in one of those other spaces.
Always wondered why my plants had died. Just wasn't creating the right environment for them to thrive.
You were not creating a resilient system for your plants.
I just thought it was their responsibility. Oh, so interesting. And it's out in a week, a couple of weeks.
Actually, by the time this goes, we'll be live.
Amazing.
With huge thanks to our contributors, as well as the wonderful people that helped me pull the white paper together. We had, a lot of very important senior people contribute to it. So thank you very much if you're one of the people that did that. And I mean, what would you say is the first thing you would do with it?
I think really take an honest look at your organization through the lens of the model, which I think is even just having that model to answer those questions and go through each layer yourself. As you say, you already have some hypotheses, but I do think sharing that with leadership is absolutely key. This should be a tool for you to say, look, we've been looking at resilience all wrong. We know we have huge amounts of unexpected changes coming down, as well as the ones we're already navigating. So we would like to look through resilience with a different lens. And you could even use that map to basically say, okay, here are the things that I think we would have an issue with. These are hypotheses. I'd love to do a culture scan to check. This will help us define a roadmap that's sustainable and long-term, instead of just asking our colleagues to sit through more resilience training and more change training that's coming down. Let's be ready. Let's be set up for success, because this isn't going away anytime soon.
What would you say to someone that was reading the white paper that's probably in a people and culture space, and they can see the role that within the model, they can see, for example, the parts of each layer that they would be responsible for, particularly the trunk and the leaves?
Yeah.
How does someone like that start to navigate the wider conversation internally? How, like everything you've just said, spot on. But what would be your advice to someone like that of how they actually get the conversation to open up beyond a people and culture responsibility?
It's really hard. And I think it depends on that people and culture relationship with leadership. But I think the reality is, from what you were saying, change is not going to be a people and culture project. These are not one-off culture or systems transformations. This is not a new IT system. This is not getting your people onto Workday. This is, we know that change is going to be both inevitable, persistent, and unrelenting. So we need to take an always-on approach to change readiness, and therefore we need to change the whole nature of our organization and make sure that resilience is baked in. So this becomes not a people and culture conversation. This is an everyone problem. This is a CELT conversation.
It's business critical.
Yeah.
And I guess it needs to be on the agenda in that way.
Yeah. But I think it's also about showing leadership how this will help them, because they're frustrated too. I mean, you also are thinking about leadership teams who are having to make huge pivots and bets and guess what's coming down and think about how they themselves are going to respond to this as well, whilst also worrying their people aren't going to keep pace. So this says to them, we agree, we see how serious that is, and we're actually going to build a system that works for all of us, instead of you having to navigate it, your middle managers having to navigate it, and the colleagues at large having to navigate it. This is not an individual issue. This is something we all share, and it's a collective cultural challenge we're all going to face.
And I think for those clients and organizations that do focus on the individual layer, I would say to you, let's measure it. If you don't make any other changes in your organization except providing your colleagues with much needed resources and tools, which is a good thing. I wouldn't like anyone to think we're being negative about that side. It's just that we're saying that's one part of a much wider puzzle. But if we were talking to someone that was doing that, I think what I would be asking them to do is to measure it, to really look at the rates of sickness, burnout, and productivity, especially in periods of heightened change, because of change is constant, but there are also periods where, you know, you can see the intensity increase, and then see whether it's working. You know, treat it like a diagnosis and look at whether the intervention you have made is actually having an impact in those intense moments.
Or at the very basic, if you're already doing that training and that coaching, instead of making it about your personal ability to withstand, looking at how you can link in some of those other layers. So, for example, the current resilience training is all about time management. Okay, if time management is not going well, what other resources are there available to you? Or if you're dealing with high stress, what other resources does the system have already? So it could be about surfacing things you already have, to your bereavement example. It could be about signposting. It could be about making colleagues really aware of how the system currently is designed,
flaws
that they might not even be aware of. And through that, you could also be doing research. So listening to colleague feedback on that, and they will point out the gaps to you as well. Because if you've created a safe space for those trainings to take part, they can also be focus groups. So it's not just a delivered message, but it's actually, okay, is there anything in what we've described that you feel if you were struggling or you were dealing with a period of high change that you couldn't cope with, that you wouldn't understand how the system could support you and what your individual role is? And if it's not clear to them, then great, that's a feedback point, that's a data point you can then use to identify where the challenges are.
And honestly, I think in a couple of years, it will be a word that we're using to replace engagement, even maybe productive. It will be something that when you have your chief transformation officer, they will also be an expert in how to build and maintain resilient teams, how to build and design resilient organizations. I think it's really the start of like cultural architecture, where I am actually quite excited by that, because I think this word engagement has been a little bit problematic in its definition. And I think resilience is more intentional, it's more of the moment, and it will definitely help by using a model like ours. It will definitely help actually map the business and be able to get to a point of better outcomes in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. What a time to be a chief transformation officer.
Right.
Do you think that role will even exist? Like sort of chief digital officers and
good question.
Head of AI. I sort of feel like with AI, the conversation is already moving into a space where, why are you talking about AI? AI just is.
Yeah.
And everything should be seen through the lens of how AI will impact that, versus it being an AI thing, or you're an AI expert.
Yeah.
You know, as someone who was a digital expert at the moment, you know, of sort of social media, and I think at Twitter's foundation, that didn't last very long.
No.
It was sort of like, all right, so you understand social media, great. So does everyone need to now. There's not, you know, it's not specialisms don't last for long when things are moving that fast.
And I think that's why this conversation is so important, because that is the way it's going. The level of change that we're withstanding now. Gartner found that in 2016, the average colleague went through 2 changes, enterprise level changes a year. And now it's 13. That's more than 1 a month.
I think their stat also the famous one used to be like 70% of change efforts fail or something like that. I wonder how much that's gone up now, to be honest, because it must have done.
The punchline of that was, but it was almost the reverse if colleagues were involved in the change.
Yeah.
And I think if you think from 2016 to 2025, we've gone from 2 to 13 level enterprise changes a year. That's more than 1 a month. And that's just the changes that colleagues are getting in work. Never mind their personal lives, never mind the wider political, socioeconomic impacts. That's just what they experience in work. So I think your point of, you know, is this going to be the new digital? Yes. And that's why designing for resilience now and looking at the sort of the trying to become a bit of a culture architect now will set you in good stead for the future, where change will just be part of the everyday and so expected that we'll become complacent in people's ability to deal with it unless we have designed a system that will actually help.
Yeah. I mean, you have graduates coming out of university now who started a course for a job that might not exist now.
Totally.
So people have to be ready. And that whole, I can't help thinking about that whole new cohort of graduates who are going to struggle to find jobs unless they very quickly embrace the new reality of the job market for entry-level roles.
Yeah.
So this is now an immediate and absolutely critical. So hopefully people are listening and getting excited and are going to sign up on our website, TheTruthWorks.co, to get early access to the paper, and then they'll receive it in their inbox within a few days.
And we would love to hear your thoughts, feedback, and builds on any of the work that's in there. And yeah, can't wait to have many and more conversations on resilient organisations.